Welcome everybody to this week's Friday Fireside Chat. You probably know I'm Rita McGrath, and my guests this week are Chester Elton, the apostle of appreciation, and Adrian Gostick. And, and the two are partners in a firm called Culture Works. They have spent, a lifetime basically by now, really helping people think about how to build more positive, creative, human cultures, both at home and at work. And I think what could we possibly need more than that right now? So their recent book is called Leading with Gratitude, 8 Leadership Practices for Extraordinary Business Results. And we're definitely going to want to talk about those. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. I don't tend to do Q&A because I just never know who's on the call. So chat's a better mechanism. This is being recorded. So don't say anything you do not want your mother, favorite aunt, or the New York Times to know. So other than that, it's pretty free-flowing conversation. And I'm really looking forward to it because I think what you guys do is I think the pandemic has only brought it out in sharp relief how much inhumanity there is at work and how we can maybe turn some of those things around. And before I forget, your new book, Anxiety at Work, is coming out on May 4th. So maybe we should have another conversation just about that one when you're ready to begin promotions for that one. I think that would be absolutely great. So let me start off with just some introductions. So Chester Elton is actually Canadian.
What?
This guilty secret he's been hiding from you all these years, Adrian. And Adrian Gostick and he have written a whole bunch of very, very well-regarded, well-received books, several of whom have made the bestseller list, including The Carrot Principle and this one here, Leading with Gratitude. And we'll have to share with our readers the origin story of this book because I think it's really interesting how some of the people involved in getting the book launched are no longer part of the book in a big way. So the two of them, as I said, are partners in a company called the Culture Works. They're really about making workplaces better. I think that's where I would start. So in the book, you talk about 8 myths of why workplaces are not so great. So maybe that's a good place to start.
Well, I'm happy to jump in. Oh, sorry, Chester. I'm happy to jump in, and thanks, Rita. We're huge fans of your work, and now have been glad to be friends with you for the last few years. So thanks for having us on. Let's jump into the myths because this is one of the issues in we're in this pandemic. So many leaders are saying, look, let's focus in. Especially at the beginning, they were saying, let's worry about the bottom line. Let's keep these businesses rolling, and understandably. And the people side got lost in a lot of our leadership, not just then, even before. So this book really is about how you lead in tough times. In fact, the first story is about Gary Ridge leading WD-40 through the last recession. And so what we found were a lot of reasons that leaders weren't taking the time to be grateful. One of the biggest ones is I just don't have the time. Another one is that, look, people need too much coddling nowadays, especially those young people. And so we addressed these myths one by one. Like, for example, time. We found that the best managers who are really good at gratitude, who have very, very high employee engagement scores, spend less than an hour a week on this. So it doesn't take an inordinate amount of time. A typical 50-hour-a-week manager week, it's about 2% of their time. So it really wasn't a lot, of time and effort. And just one of these ideas that people need too much coddling today, right? We heard a lot.
Yeah, I hated that. I hate that one, and generally from older generation leaders, right? They'd say, hey, I never got all this praise and recognition and I turned out all right, as they're coming out of counseling for the third time, and what we found in particular in the research is, it was sort of a complaint against the younger generation. And as we started to talk to millennials and even the Gen Z, or as we would say in Canada, Gen Z, that it's not so much that we're looking for praises. They were just looking for, hey, how am I doing? It was a feedback loop. They're a digital generation. You get a lot of feedback loops in video games and so on. And so it wasn't so much that, look, tell me I'm great. It's how am I doing? Am I on track? And so this idea of the interpretation generationally of how you use gratitude. One of the ones that we really found interesting was that fear was the best motivator. And we discovered, and Adrian, you and I had a lot of conversations about this, is how many leaders were leading by fear and didn't realize they were leading by fear. And Adrian, why don't you expand on that?
And Rita, in your coaching with senior leaders, you probably see this now and then that leaders do sort of cast this pall around them, and they don't even realize they're doing it. They think they're being tough or smart or driven, and in many cases, or in sometimes insecure. And in many cases, they really are putting this fear out into the workplace. Our surveys, we've now surveyed more than 1 million employees over the last decade. About a third of managers are seen this way by their employees. And in most cases, they have no idea how they come across.
Right.
Well, and part of it, too, has to do with how we construct organizational systems, right? There's a CEO, I'll name him, Jeff Immelt at General Electric.
Sure.
And there have been a number of stories told about Immelt, who I've met many times and thought he was a perfectly nice guy. But, his staff knew he likes a certain beverage, and that beverage is always there at the right temperature. His staff knew he liked a certain temperature in the room, which happened to be about 10 degrees colder than any of his female employees liked. And so they're all there with like bundles, hoodies. And I would be willing to bet he never issued an edict and said, thou shalt have this beverage and thou shalt keep the temperature there, and so forth and so on. But I think when you reach that sort of hierarchical position, it's very difficult to train people not to do those things, even though you haven't asked for them. And I think that is part of the fear dynamic, right? It's
absolutely. In fact, we used, unfortunately, poor Jeff Immelt, who we've met as well. We've presented on the same stage as Jeffrey, and like I said, comes across as a delightful person, but did create a little bit of a culture at GE when he was there that was unmistakable. In fact, many GE employees have called it the theater of success, that they had to present themselves as always successful. We could never admit we had failed at anything. And that never creates positive results when people can't bring you problems in your organization. We've loved what Larry Culp has done since coming in as CEO of GE. We actually had a chance to work with Larry at Danaher. Tremendous success at Danaher, and that he's brought in this new transparent culture into GE, and you already see the results that are starting to happen there because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I talk about a lot in my book is if you have that kind of don't bring me a problem without bringing me a solution, you got to have the answer. You can't look as though things aren't going well kind of culture. You never get the information you need at a strategic level to be able to make really important decisions. So the notion of this sort of theater of success, right? And I think, it's partly the person, because it's kind of fun. You make a call and the helicopter turns up, and, my plane leaves when I do. And I mean, the sort of things I've heard from CEs over the years, it's sort of fun. But I think if you don't very proactively mitigate against that, it can really get, in the way. So one of my heroes, and I know one of yours, is Alan Mulally.
Oh, yeah.
Who is just such a genius at breaking through some of this stuff, So maybe talk a little bit about how Alan shows up in your book and what some of the stories are that you learned from him. Yeah,
well, we love the endorsement on the back. Alan said, "I love this book," and it was brilliant. Through the MJ100 and whatnot, we've gotten to know Alan quite well. We've seen him present 2 or 3 times. There you go. He's on the back of the book. Yeah. And got to spend some time with him talking about this whole idea of leading with gratitude. And of course, we used the case study of Ford, which is, I think, one of the classic case studies that is studied in every business school. How do you turn around a culture? And then he did it with gratitude. He praised that. The story that we love about Alan, we actually got from Eric Schumberg, about when his first big Detroit auto show, and they were unveiling the Taurus, which he'd brought back, which was a big part of their comeback. And he pulled up on the stage the guys that polished the car. It's just such a lovely story about he could have hogged the spotlight. He was the new CEO. It was his show. And yet he wanted to make sure that the brilliance of this car wasn't just the marketing and the engineering. I mean, it was right down to the guys that polished the fenders, you know. The other thing that I love about our time with Alan was people misinterpret leading with gratitude as being soft.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, if there's one guy that is not soft, it's Alan Mulally. You know, I think they wrote about him in his book, American Icon, that he had a spine of titanium.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time was very gracious and encouraging. And to your point, he never expected everybody to have all the answers. You know, we talk about that on asking for or soliciting and acting on input.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how do we figure this out? You know, as a collective,
Mm-hmm.
let's solve the problem. What was the quote, Adrian? You have a problem. You are not the problem.
Uh-huh.
Which were some great lessons from Alan in the book. What would you add, Adrian? Yeah.
Yeah, and Rita, you know, one of the great stories of Alan when he first took over, nobody was willing to bring a problem. Right. In fact, you know, every Thursday he would assemble his leaders, and 300 projects, they were looking red, green, yellow. Everything was green because we never admit a problem here. Until, guys, he said, finally, guys, we're about to lose $17 billion this year. There's got to be one problem. Bring me one. And the next week, of course, Mark Fields, as North American president, brings him one problem. And he says, the room just went silent. People were expecting Mark to be hauled out of there by a couple of goons. He says, but I began the slow golf clap. I wanted to let everybody know this is terrific, Mark. Now, I love what he said next. Alan said, by the way, guys, we don't have the answer in this room for Mark's problem. It was a latch problem, one of their vehicles that was being delayed. He says, we don't have it. We're a bunch of leaders here. We haven't been engineers for 20 years. The answer is out there. There's a bright young engineer out somewhere in the world that we need to find and bring and help the solution. So that's I love that vulnerability of we don't have all the answers, but we can find the answers.
The other story you write in the book, and I just think from a human point of view, this is so interesting, is the meeting with 3,000 dealers in this, or 4,000, some huge number of Ford dealers in this football stadium. And he brings the Ford people and these dealers who are basically, at that time, they were at each other's throats, right? Yeah. And maybe describe that scene.
And what I love is he, first off, you know, every Ford leader, you know, since the dawn of time has used script, you know, teleprompter later when that came. And he says, no, I'm just going to get up and talk to them. And his handlers went, you got to be kidding, right? You don't talk to these people without, I mean, everything will be analyzed. He says, no, I'm just going to get up and talk. And then he had all the Ford HQ employees, and there are hundreds of them in the audience, stand up, turn around, and say, "We love you" to the dealers. And they went, "Yeah, we love you." And he says, "No, that's not good enough." And finally, he had them do it 3 times until finally they went, "We love you." And he says, that's the kind of a culture we're going to create. And this is Ford. This is, you know, UAW. This is tough, sharp elbow culture. And he says, no. It's going to be about love. Now, you know the results, right? 1,800% increase in stock appreciation, from a $17 billion loss to a $6 billion gain. You know, one of the remarkable turnarounds. And it's because of treating your people with gratitude. Every time they moved a red to a yellow, it was a celebration. Every yellow to a green, it's a celebration.
Mm-hmm. I just think that's so important. And another leader you've mentioned in the book, who I also know through Marshall and the other folks, is Hubert Joly at Best Buy. And again, you know, Best Buy had been run by a bunch of folks by the time he got it. Now, they had very bright spots in the past, but by the time Hubert was brought in, you know, a lot of the experienced people either had been let go or weren't being, you know, acknowledged for what they brought to the experience. Everybody had written the company off for dead. They said, you know, e-commerce, right? And I think part of Hubert's genius was realizing, firstly, that we don't actually want a 32-inch TV. What we actually want is that TV on the wall, connected to the internet, you know, with a remote control my wife can understand. You know? I mean, that's what we want. And Hubert set the company on a path to do that. But what he realized was that the thing that was going to make the difference was literally the human component.
Yeah. You know, the message too, and we love the story of Hubert Joly under assumed positive intent. You know, He, by the way, has a book coming out by Harvard Business called
The Heart of Business.
Yes. And I'm reading it. He was gracious enough to send me an advance copy. And the story of how he got involved with Best Buy and turned it around. And again, talk about asking for, soliciting and acting on input was really right down to the people on the floor. Now, the assume positive intent part, which is one of the 8 best practices that we talk about, is he said, I may be crazy. I just assume that, 99% of people come to work every day wanting to do a good job. Mm-hmm. And in trying to do a good job, they're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. We can fix the mistakes. Let's focus on, the purpose. Let's give people meaningful work. Let's get ideas. Everybody thought Best Buy was in competition with Amazon and in competition with Apple. And all of a sudden, Hubert brings Amazon and Apple into the store, and partners with them. And,
well, the other thing I love was he kind of looks around his property and he says, well, you need to be here, right? Because Samsung is here and Dell is here and Apple needs to be here and Microsoft. Good, you can pay rent.
Yes.
I love that.
A revenue stream, right? And, it's so interesting because, Hubert, again, that human touch, and investing in his people and, the Geek Squad and building it up, and there are a lot of companies that do that, a Boehringer Ingelheim, we've done some work with Todd Billingsley, and I love that company. They invest in their people, right? They have classes and many times, we really want you to attend. We really, okay, you have to attend, right? And these ideas of the human touch in business and developing the next generation of leaders. And what can we learn from all aspects? I mean, they'll bring in coaches from university football teams and so on to talk about how they encourage their athletes and so on. So, so often we think of these as being the exceptions, where there really are a lot of great companies out there like Boehringer Ingelheim and of course WD-40, our good friend Gary Ridge, who we adore, with that wonderful Aussie accent that just makes you like him right out of the gate.
I had Gary toward the end of last year. It was kind enough to come on and talk about this principle. Don't grade my paper, give me an A. Which I thought, teach me how to get an A. That's what it was. And I just thought philosophically, that's wonderful. So I'm going to link here to a really good friend of mine, Zeynep Ton at MIT, who has written about good jobs. And I think her work, and she comes from an operations point of view. She didn't, she's not like from HR or something. But what she discovered was this anomaly, which was that you had firms like Costco, let's say, even in cutthroat, low margin, very difficult businesses. And yet they invest in their people, they cross-train, they're great places to work, they have low turnover, they have low churn. And I guess the conundrum both she and I wrestle with is, why is this not the norm?
Yeah, that's the $64,000 question, to date ourselves here. But, there really is. And one of the, sometimes people ask me in Chester, they go, oh, you must go into some really diseased cultures, some really bad places to fix them. And the answer is no, they never call us, do they, Rita? Those really bad places don't feel like they need this. And they keep trying things. Instead of trying to reach out to the hearts and minds of their people, which is what Hubert Joly did when he went into Best Buy. The first week he was there, he spent the entire week working in one of the stores, asking people, what's the matter here? And they told him, they said, look, they took away our discount. Why would they take away our discount when the executives are getting huge bonuses? He goes, you're right. That's not right. He says, we don't have a good system, intranet system for searching for products around our system. That's silly. We have all these stores. Why aren't we using this? And he came back with all these ideas. So instead of just going in saying, well, this is what I've done before, he was extremely well regarded in the industry. He went in listening. What he said to us, I know it's a cliche, but I got 2 ears and one mouth and use them in that ratio. And, and he did. And I thought that kind of, we had a question in the chat I was noticing about vulnerability. That's really one of the first steps of vulnerability, is admitting you don't have all the answers and it's okay. Our good friend, Marshall Goldsmith, he talks about, you want to be the smartest person in the room, right? You want to over deliver value. That's not what great leaders do. They listen and they cull those great answers that are out there among their people.
Absolutely.
And aside to that, my hero my whole life has been my dad. And he's got so many great anecdotes. And we talked about this one time. He said, Chess, you never want to be the smartest guy in the room. And then he had a great sense of humor. And he said, and the good thing for you is literally you can walk into any room and you're not going to be the smartest guy in the room because you are my son, right?
Thanks, Dad.
Yeah, thanks, Dad.
That'll get you started off with a sense of humility.
Yeah.
So some of our listeners won't have your book or be familiar with the book. So I just thought it would be really helpful to go through each of the 8 practices on the positive side and dispense with the myths on the negative side if you prefer. But the first one was solicit and act on input. And we've touched on it a little bit. Maybe if you could expand on that.
This is one of my favorites because every leader thinks they do this quite well. No, I get lots of ideas from my people. And other times they'll tell us, well, I'm a little afraid of this because people get offended if their ideas don't get used. So this really might not seem like a gratitude idea, but it really is. There's no higher level of gratitude than listening and soliciting and acting on input. One of the great leaders we profiled in here is Quint Studer, who is a leadership guru in the healthcare space, ran Baptist Hospital for many years, and then eventually became a consultant helping other companies do this. And one of my favorite stories that Quint told is, he says, look, he says, first day on the job, I'm the new administrator, CEO of Baptist Hospital. I have my parking spot right out front. He says, but I park in the farthest lot. And I want to listen to people as they're walking in. And so I start having conversations. I'll talk to one of the nurses. Hey, I'm Quint. I'm new here. I'm the administrator, so I work for you. What should I do today? And he says, from the looks I got, most of them were thinking, well, go take a drug screening. Okay, you're kind of coming across a little creepy there, buddy. But eventually they started opening up. One nurse said, well, look where we're parking. This is kind of a sketchy neighborhood. I'm kind of a little afraid. And those bushes out there haven't been trimmed. People could be hiding there. By the time they got back, the next, she got finished with her 12-hour shift. The bushes were not only trimmed, but he'd had maintenance put up a fence. And you don't think that story spread? Little things like that can make a big difference when we solicit and act on input.
Yeah, one of the things I talk about a lot is executive symbolism. And I think a lot of execs, and this is not an intentional thing, but a lot of execs forget that every single thing they do, from trimming bushes to listening to parking far away, every single thing that they do is dripping with symbolism. And when I think of the leaders that use these gratitude principles effectively, what they don't is they don't just do it, right? They also figure out how you make that visible difference to people so that they actually believe it. It's not just empty words. It's not just theater. It's really, really believing it. So your second point is assume positive intent. And this is lovely, I think. Maybe, Chester, you want to take that one?
Yeah. One of my favorites. And, we heard about this years ago from Scott O'Neill, actually, a good friend of ours. He's actually not in the book. He's the CEO of HBSE. They own the Philadelphia 76ers and the New Jersey Devils, and have shares in other clubs. And he said, you always want to assume positive intent. It's very much along the lines of Hubert Joly. I think everybody's coming to work to do a good job, and they're going to make mistakes. Gary Ridge, we don't make mistakes. We have learning opportunities. When you assume positive intent, everything goes better. Indira Nooyi, the past CEO of Pepsi, great quote from her that, when you assume negative intent, you get angry. You vilify people. You want to shoot the messenger. How could you do this to me? As opposed to, well, what's the problem? Hey, I know, it's very rare that somebody comes to work and says, my goal is to really do something horrific at least 3 times before lunch, and I'm going to keep track of that, generally people are good people, right? And so this idea of, as she goes on to say, when you assume positive intent, everything gets better. Now it's about solving the problems. It's about making the product better. It's about satisfying the customer. And so, and not only is assume positive intent a great way to build a great culture, we talk about at the end of the book, we'll probably get there, our baker's dozen of how to lead a grateful life. When you use it in your personal life, and I'll tell you one cute story really quick, because we've got 8 to get to, but, we've got this gratitude journal that we have on LinkedIn, and we publish it once a month. We're going to go to twice a month now. And, by the way, I have some ideas. Adrian is the writer. So if you love the writing, Adrian is the brilliant writer. We collaborate, but there's one writer, and that's Adrian, and he's brilliant. So, I'll write an article and then I send it to Adrian and he makes it 10 times better. Well, this was in November and I said, be grateful for hard times. And we get all kinds of great feedback. Oh, this is, we should focus on what we're learning. And I'm reading all these comments and I'm feeling really good about myself. I really am brilliant. This really was a great message, And the guy says, I'm going to print it out and put it on my bathroom mirror. And I'm thinking, and then right in the middle, and it was hilarious, wasn't it? Right in the middle, this guy writes really briefly, he goes, you're an idiot. It's like, you're an idiot. And I was taken aback and I thought, okay, so I assume positive intent. What's going on? My guess is this guy's having the worst day ever. And he goes to read the gratitude journal to get uplifted. And I'm telling him, no, you should be really grateful for this misery that you're in right now. And so I thought, well, how could I cheer him up? So I channeled my dad and I responded, well, thank you. By the way, my children would agree. To try to brighten his day. So assume positive intent really builds a safe culture. You talk a lot about psychological safety. And then in your personal life, give people a beat. You never know what people are going through, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of my favorite stories that Marshall Goldsmith likes to talk about is dogs. And he says, why do we like dogs so much? He says, because dogs are suck-ups. You could be having an argument with your wife. Your kids could be, they're teenagers, so they don't want to talk to you. But you walk in the house and the dog's like, where have you been? Thank God you're back.
And you've been gone for 5 minutes.
Our son's fiance has a dog, and it just like she turns the corner. It's like she hasn't even left the room, and the dog's like, is it okay? She will come back. It's really very endearing. Okay. Then we have walk in their shoes.
Walk in their shoes. This is an interesting one too, because we mentioned Gary Ridge, CEO of WD-40, who's actually really good at this. One of the case studies we have in there actually is from Fairmont Hotels, which back, pre-pandemic, and now that it's, we're kind of able to now start staying at places again a little bit. This hotel idea is really interesting because, if there's really one organization where, there's really sometimes a disconnect between senior leadership and what the people on the floor and ground are doing, it can be sort of the service industry. Yeah. And headquarters makes these edicts and sends them out to all their hundreds of locations. Well, at Fairmont, what they require is at least one day a year, every one of their senior leaders from director above has to spend a full day working with one of the guest facing people. And it can't be, I'm going to go whip up, souffles with the chef. No. You're working the front desk, you're doing housekeeping. So one of the execs we interviewed, he had just done a shift doing housekeeping. And he says, it's a hard day. You turn in your phone. You don't have your phone with you. You put on the uniform. It's early in the morning and you start going cleaning rooms. And he says, it's a hard job. And he says, what you kind of as a leader, you start doing things and you want to say, Rita, what you should do to turn rooms is this and this. And he says, but you can't do that because they've been doing this a long time. You have to wait. And at the end of the day, you might make a suggestion or two, but mostly you're expressing gratitude. But he says, boy, you go back to the senior leadership team. And when we're starting talking around changes we're going to make to housekeeping, this or that, you are a lot more in tune with how it's going to impact the real people out there. Mm-hmm. So I just love that idea. Are we being empathetic? Are we understanding the real issues that our people are going with? Now, you might not be able to spend a full day with your people, but you can certainly ask them the challenges that they're facing on a regular basis.
Oh, absolutely. One of our mutual friends is Martin Lindstrom, who's just written a great book called The Ministry of Common Sense. And it's fascinating. I listen to you speak and I listen to him speak and then in our own lives. And you look at the crazy, sometimes just really crazy things organizations do. And you say to yourself, how did this come to be? And my only conclusion is this stuff kind of accumulates like barnacles, right? And that if someone doesn't occasionally go through and say, okay, this is no longer needed, this no longer applies, that it just makes the customer experience or the user experience or the employee experience that much worse.
Yeah, yeah. We are huge fans of Martin Lindstrom, by the way. So I've got his book, little plug.
There you go.
Buy 2 copies of Leading with Gratitude, and then buy 1 copy.
If you have money left over. Yeah.
Yeah. As the bonus book. The point is, what's really interesting. I read a wonderful book called The Path Between Two Seas by David McCullough, and you talk about barnacles. And one of the great benefits of going through the canal was they would take their ships from the ocean and go through fresh water. The way you get rid of barnacles is fresh water.
Oh, that's a wonderful analogy.
Yeah, and so when
you
think about that, you bring in the pure water, you bring in the fresh water, scrapes off all those barnacles. And it was really funny. What they found is the cost of actually going through the canal was offset by the fact that they never had to put their ships in dry dock to scrape off the barnacles. So, and I think that we should have put that in the book, Adrian. That would have been great. The idea, though, that when you do the right thing, it heals things. It makes things run a little smoother. That really is the case, and I know you're going to get to, look for small wins. And so often we would find leaders that were good about celebrating, when you hit the quota or the year-end banquet or whatever, not so good about building the momentum to the small wins. Back to Alan just quickly. It was a win when Mark Fields put up a red square. You'd say, no, that's horrible. Absolutely. And that was a win because he knew that people were starting to trust each other. It was a win when you went from green to red. It was a win when you went from red to yellow and yellow to green. This idea, and the same thing with WD-40, we don't make mistakes. We have learning opportunities. What can we learn? How can we grow? Let's move forward. That attitude of looking for the little things that are going right. Hubert Joly with the people on the floor. I'll tell you a story we actually didn't use in the book, but it was an ER in Orange County in New York, where the head nurse came in, and it was a horrible situation. She said, I started by praising nurses and orderlies that smiled. That's where they started. Hey, thanks for smiling. And you think, well, everybody should smile. Not in this place, And that momentum that you build in looking for small wins, in turning things around is so appreciated. It's just so appreciated. And such an important part about building a culture of gratitude. The little thank yous along the way that make the big events more meaningful.
I remember back in the day. So when I first started at Columbia, the Uber manager of all time was Jack Welch, right? And,
oh yeah.
And what he used to do is he had this stiff note paper. I don't know if you remember this. He had this stiff note paper he kept on his desk, and he had these Sharpie markers. And whenever somebody kind of did something right, he would write out, thank you for whatever it was that he picked up along his journey. And decades later, people would have these things like framed over their desks. And I thought, what a wonderful, image for executive symbolism, right? People treasured this recognition. And, for all I know, it was the only time in their entire lives they ever heard personally from him, but that was there, like on their deathbed. This was the sort of thing they'd bequeath, to their.
Yeah, we saw the same thing actually at KFC headquarters. Yum Brands, David Novak did the same with little sets of chattering teeth. Yeah, his point was, you walked the talk. And so these little, what are they? You wind them up. They cost $5. Huh? You're right. And people would have like lights shining them on their cubicles because David Novak had given me this, and it meant that I walked the talk, which was one of their values.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it doesn't have to be expensive.
No. The other thing that I think is very interesting in your work, and I'll come back to the do's and don'ts in just a sec, but like Herb Kelleher's another example of a fantastic leader that really didn't allow bureaucracy to emerge at Southwest, really had ways of doing it. And I remember a story about one of his conversations with a young person who was working in one division. And he said, oh, well, in our division, this is what we do. And Kelleher looked at him, he said, oh my God, nobody told me. And the young person's like looking at him going, what do you mean? He said, I didn't realize, I thought you were still part of Southwest. I didn't realize you'd been spun off. And just this symbolism of hang on here. We are all on this same boat. So look for small wins. I think we talked about that. So that's what you call seeing, right? And I think you and I really, you two and I really cross over when you talk about seeing around corners, seeing what's going on, really getting an unfiltered view. And then you talk about expressing. And this, I think, is interesting because I think for a lot of leaders, they don't want to look vulnerable. They don't want to look as though they don't know what they're doing. They have this thing about, I've always been the straight A, person. And so, give now, give often. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. We tell people, look, when it comes to, expressing gratitude, particularly if you don't have that tradition, you're not going to be good at it right away. That's fine. Just do it. Do it now, do it often, and don't be afraid. This idea of that I can get too much praise at work, right? I know. I love that expression on your face, Rita. We always joke, when was the last time anybody left work and went home to their families, their spouses, their partners, and said, man, I couldn't get anything done today. Too much praise and recognition. It was certificates, it was plaques, it was chattery teeth. Seriously, I got to start working from home. I love in the chat line, they're talking about Gary Ridge and the soul sucking CEO. He actually sent me one of his soul sucking CEO type A dolls. Yeah, I've got it right here. He said, we should write a book about the soul sucking CEO meets Garrett the Carrot. They really don't get along. So it is interesting that somehow leaders believe that if they give too much praise and recognition, that they are somehow diminished, that they are giving up part of their soul or giving up some of their authority or their command and control. And nothing could be further from the truth. Now, on the do it now, do it often, right, is if you do it badly, we talk about general praise never had any impact on anybody. If you're just wandering around going, hey, great job. Oh, you're the best. You're the Tower of Pisa. You're number one. Yeah. It has no impact. The specificity, do it now, do it often. And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask, say, hey, what's been going on your team? You're not going to see everything as the leader. We often think that, gratitude is top down, and we'll get to that at the end. But, when it gets to be peer-to-peer, it gets to be really good and give people permission. We got a great story. We'll save it for the end of our friend at Toronto FC and how he made it peer-to-peer. So, this idea that, look, if you do it right, you can never hear I love you too much. We love to say, are you happily married? Are you madly in love? How often do you tell your partner, your spouse, that you love them? Does it ever get old? Well, of course it doesn't, because, they mean it. Well, frequency is a part of that. If I don't hear it, my assumption is, we're negative beings. We protect ourselves. If I don't hear I love you for a period of time, my assumption is I am not loved. If at work, if I'm not getting these little updates and these little encouragements along the way, my reaction is going to be, I must be doing something wrong, or I'm invisible, or I don't matter, or my opinion doesn't matter. I mean, you can go really deep on this, right? And to your point, Rita, the way the leader conducts him or herself, their behaviors, gives everybody else permission to do the same. If you're a leader that never has written a thank you note, has never said thank you, well, all the people that report to you go, well, if I want to be the boss, I'm not going to do that either.
They mirror that behavior. Absolutely.
Exactly.
One of the things I think that has been so stressful for people during the pandemic is all those little touch points that used to happen naturally in the course of a day. Now you have to be really deliberate about it. And I'd love your take, maybe when we finish with the list here, on kind of what you're seeing in cultures and what you're seeing kind of working in this weird, I have a friend who works for an innovation part of a larger, more established company. And she and her happy little team are inventing, the next great thing in this particular sector. And she said something that's really stuck with me. She said, we all knew what was going on because we were all together. And now every day's a meeting.
Yeah.
And it's just such a different dynamic, right? Than when you sort of pass each other in the hallway and, that order came in for something, and, you don't have to think about it. And now you have to actually think about it. I caught myself, in fact, just this morning, there were like 4 great things that happened this week. And I caught myself having to say, so-and-so doesn't know that.
Nobody tells you, right? You don't know.
Well, right.
we've been doing some interesting work on the future of work. Adrian, you talk about being disparate and working from home and remote. We've found some wonderful best practices, haven't we?
Oh, we have, and we want to save that probably for a minute here. But one of the ideas is you have to create forced rituals to create ways to really bring this to light, because you're right, Rita, that we will just simply lose those water cooler moments if we are not more deliberate. And it's also in the idea of gratitude, it's also understanding really we have to be more present than ever in recognizing and rewarding those values that are really important in this world. And it may be people who are more responsive, who take ownership of issues than ever before. So it really has to change our thinking in how we lead in these times.
Yeah, I read a most fascinating article about customer service. And there were two things that I found were just blew my mind. The first thing was, and it makes sense, but I hadn't thought about it, is by the time you have to get a human being involved, all the easy problems have been solved. Companies have figured out how you forget your password, we'll let you reset it yourself. All these little problems. So by the time a customer gets to a customer service agent who is a human being, they are already way down this spiral of negativity. And then what they found was they did this really interesting analysis of who the best customer service reps were. And it turns out in that situation, the best reps are opinionated, have a position, not particularly empathetic. They are going to tell you how to get to your answer. They're a personality type that the authors call controllers. And they said, and yet controllers are the best problem solvers, right? They're not particularly empathetic. They're like, oh, yeah, okay, you're one of those people that have that problem. Let me steer you in the. So I think it's very interesting, some of our misconceptions, right? Yeah. It turns out when we really have a bad experience, we want someone who will tell us how to fix it, whether or not they are empathetic. I don't want to be told, oh, I'm so sorry. What I want is, what you need to do is this. And that just blew my mind. I thought that was great.
That is so great.
Anyway, tailored individuals.
Yeah. Well, this is a really interesting one because, somebody's listening to this going, okay, leading with gratitude in tough times. I probably need to, what Rita just said about 4 things. I missed this. I need to be better at that. So somebody's saying right now, okay, I got it. I need to be better. And we end up maybe missing the mark a little bit. We buy a stack of Starbucks cards and say, okay, every time somebody does something good, I'm going to give them the Starbucks cards. We actually did this with DHL once. We bumped into a guy who had a 40-person organization around the world, DHL, huge logistics company. And he said, no, my people love the Starbucks cards. And we gave him a little bit of a challenge. We said, go ask your people what they think about the cards. And he came back and he true to his word, he did report back to us. And he said, look, a lot of my people really appreciate the cards. We said, okay, a lot of them. He says, well, there was a couple that really don't drink coffee. One gal who works for me, she told me, I don't really drink coffee. So I give them to my neighbor because he goes to Starbucks every time he goes in to work. And he says, I guess I've been recognizing her neighbor all these years, haven't I? Yeah, you probably have. So there's a couple of things here. We tend to see things through our eyes. Okay, everything is the Starbucks card, and that can be really nice if you clean out the supply cabinet. You save me $100,000 client, probably not appropriate. So we have a little story. Chester and I, when we first started working together about 20 years ago now, we were working for a big corporation and we wrote the company's first leadership book. And so Chester, bless his heart, wanted to get me recognized, but not really understanding our motivators or anything. He wanted to get me recognized in the exact way that he would want to be recognized. Mm-hmm. Chester loves a party. You can see, look, wearing orange. Look, everything is big and bold and bright. He loves a party, he loves meeting new friends. There isn't a person Chester's ever met that he hasn't found. Yeah, look at the signature on Rita's book. No room for me to sign, you can see. He also loves watches, by the way. I don't wear a watch, but he saw I didn't have a watch. So he said, oh, Adrian will love a watch and he'll love getting invited to this big gala banquet with all of our salespeople on a weeknight, 400 people that he hasn't met yet. He's going to love it. Well, I went, what? I have to go to this banquet with people I don't know on a weeknight and get a watch that I don't like watches? What? And, so Chester is thinking there is nothing more. Yeah, that's exactly how I'd like to be recognized. And me, I'm kind of going, well, that's nothing I'd want at all. And I don't mean to appear ungrateful, but
Yeah. I love when Adrian tells this story because he really does come across as kind of ungrateful. Wouldn't you agree, Rita? I mean, I go to all this trouble to get him invited to the party and buy the watch and make the presentation, and it's still in mint condition, on his shelf somewhere, right?
But if they'd have known, the point is, if they'd have known my motivators, my top motivators are ideas like autonomy, creativity, family. So they could have actually given me an assignment where I could have used my autonomy, my creativity, or given me time with my family. That would have been very powerful for me, but they didn't know. And so again, I knew they meant well and I appreciated the effort. But if we know a little bit more about what really does motivate our people and not put our lens on everything,
Right.
And we actually did end up developing a motivators assessment later because of this and other examples.
That's on your website. It's on somebody's website.
Exactly. Yeah. On thecultureworks.com. Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. Thecultureworks.com. So Missy, maybe you could put that in the chat if you get a chance. So then we have reinforced core values.
Chester?
Yes, reinforced core values. It's a good one. Yeah. The whole idea of gratitude, of course, is to make sure that the reward is taking you towards the next step on reinforcing what your culture really believes in, right? It's so interesting. And rewarded behavior gets repeated, right? And so you want to reward the right behavior. If social responsibility is really important in your company and you take a team out and you go, Habitat for Humanity, then great. You want to make a big deal out of that. And the other thing that's really important there is primacy recency. Is the closer the recognition is to the behavior, the more likely it is to be repeated. It's very Pavlovian, right? So when you see that stuff, it's not, don't save it for the end of the year. Make sure you're doing it now.
Absolutely.
Right. To reinforce that. So often you'll have leaders that recognize what's important to them that may not be the core value of the company. Right. I love, WD-40 where their top value is do the right thing. And he says all the other values don't make any sense unless you get that one right, And so when people see people doing the right thing, is this the right thing to do? They celebrate that. They make sure that it's called out and valued that way. And so, yeah, all the gratitude in the world misdirected isn't never going to get you where you want to go.
Well, it's manipulative at that point, right?
Exactly.
And one thing you just said there, Chester, is important too. We work with a lot of companies on their values, their vision as they define their culture. Prioritizing values is actually quite important because they can butt up against each other and fight each other. And so I love what Gary has done there. Look, doing the right thing, that's number one. Speed may be one of our values, but speed can never trump doing the right thing. And so there are some ideas that can be very powerful there.
Absolutely. And then you promised me a peer-to-peer story.
So this is an interesting one. Peer-to-peer, is such a powerful concept. So many managers sort of listening to something like this will go, this sounds like more work for me. And it can be a little bit more, but you really have to turn to the people who work with you and for you to find those ideas. One of the great stories, Bill Manning, great, one of the best sports leaders you've probably never heard of. We met him when he was running Real Salt Lake, took them to the championship, and then went over to Toronto FC and took them to the championship. But when he came in 2014, the team hadn't even sniffed the playoffs. And he said, my team wasn't exactly working as a team. Now, a Major League Soccer team is a small kind of group. There may be hundreds of people working for them on the weekends and during a game, but in the middle of the week, it's about 60 to 70 core people, sales, marketing, HR, finance, those types of groups. And he says they weren't really talking to each other. And he says, so one of the things that I like to do, he says, I have a staff meeting every week with all my people, and I will ask different individuals to recognize somebody else. And it has to be somebody in another team. And he says, I got a couple of $100 Nordstrom's gift certificate. So it's nice, but they can't recognize themselves or somebody in their own team. So it really makes people think, okay. So he says, we were there, and he calls on John, who's in sales, and says, John, who are you going to recognize this week? And he says, I'd like to recognize Aaron. Aaron's in accounting. And so whenever I sell a season ticket package, I always have Aaron call the client right away to get the money, but he's also so excited for them. And he never loses a sale for me, always finalizes it, always makes the client feel so good about their purchase. I'd like to recognize Aaron. So Aaron comes up, and it's a great little moment. But Bill is telling us there's wisdom behind this, because everybody's going out throughout the week going, am I helping other teams enough? Am I just worrying about my own team, or worrying about others? Little ways that gratitude can break down those walls and build a team where everybody is rooting for each other.
I love that. I love that. And it's so simple too. I mean, that's not hugely time consuming. I think
it's almost like delegating. It's freeing up time. You've got everybody else looking around who's doing great work, right?
Yeah, I really like that idea. That's cool. So you want to wrap up? I mean, we're sort of, oh my goodness, time is flying. I do want to get to your next book, which is about anxiety at work, and perhaps talk a little bit about your ideas about the future of work. So leading with gratitude, just for those of you that don't have it, very practical, full of great stories, and things you can actually do. I mean, it's like, this is not you don't have to be a super person to do some of these things, which I love.
Thanks for asking about anxiety at work, because, it is really interesting. People say, well, you just finished a book on gratitude and you jumped to anxiety. Like what happened? They said, well, you may have heard
tell us how you really feel about that, Chester.
Yeah. You may have heard of a thing called the pandemic. Anyway, it is really interesting. We live in the world of culture. What makes a great culture? Where people believe what they do matters, they make a difference, and that difference is celebrated. Well, it became very obvious very quickly that you can't have a healthy culture if people are anxious. And never before have people been more anxious at work than now. Right? They're worried about their jobs. They're worried about their families, their health, how they're educating their kids, and so on. In fact, it is the number one issue in the workplace today. Another thing that the research showed us, Adrian mentioned, we had over 1 million engagement surveys, as well as over 90,000 people that have taken our engagement survey or our motivators assessment. So really rich data to mine. Generationally, while it's the number one issue overall, for millennials in particular, it's almost 50%. I mean, which is a ridiculously high number when you think of all the things you could be worried about at work. And so we really wanted to take a deep dive on that. Now, the origin of the book, I think, is really important. And I'll pass it to Adrian to talk about, where did the idea come from?
Well, and we've been actually working on this for several years. I remember a couple of years ago now, I was working with a huge defense contractor who was doing a speech to their 200 senior leaders. And we had about 15 minutes at the end they wanted to reserve for questions. And I was really quite taken back by every single question was about their younger employees. These guys don't get it, how customer centric we are, and we never miss deadlines. And how do we get them to buy in? And it was really interesting. They wanted me to give them strategies to get them to change, that they could change the mindset of these younger people coming in that weren't really getting it. And, as we started talking, it became very clear that they wanted to do absolutely nothing themselves as leaders to rethink about how they were leading. And over a little time, it became very apparent that we have got to change, especially with new knowledge employees coming in. As Chester says, almost half of people in their 20s have symptoms of an anxiety disorder, not just a little stress, a little worry, full-blown anxiety disorder, especially during this pandemic. And as we started talking to a lot of 20-year-olds about this, they say, we talk about this all the time. You guys have no idea what our conversations are about, but it's around mental health. In fact, 75% of Gen Z have said they have left a job for mental health reasons. And so there's this huge discussion that's happening with younger people that us older leaders have no idea about. In fact, I'll ask you the question, Rita. What percent of employees feel safe talking to their boss about their mental health? What percent would you think?
It's got to be tiny, like
6%? Yeah, 10%. Good guess. 10%. And why? And a lot of leaders go, no, my people talk to me about everything. You wouldn't believe the stuff they talk to me about, except mental health. Right. And I don't want to show I'm vulnerable. I might not get the next promotion if they don't think I can handle it. There's a ton of reasons we don't do this. And so this book, the first goal, and I had my son help us with this. He's 25, brilliant young man who suffered from anxiety since he was a child. And, has graduated with honors in genetics and biotechnology, all this amazing stuff that he has done. that he's had to fight through anxiety. And so he's helped us a lot with the writing and the research. And it was really interesting hearing from not only his perspective, but a lot of younger people. So our goal, first off, was to remove the stigma and teach managers how you spot anxiety, how you talk about it, how you be more vulnerable yourself, and then offer up the ways that you can lead in a more effective manner to bring down levels of uncertainty and increase levels of resilience.
Yeah, I love that. That is so valuable. Wow.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, and just to jump in, I'll tell you what we found fascinating is very few employees felt comfortable talking to the employee assistance program people because they don't believe it's not going to get into their folder, right? So we've actually created an online community. You can go to wethrivetogether.global. So wethrivetogether.global, and it's a free community where we talk about wellness. We talk about, anxiety. We bring in experts once a month. We write articles once a month. We've got a podcast called Anxiety at Work. We drop it every Friday. In fact, we're going to drop one in about 10 minutes where we bring in experts, not only doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists and so on, business leaders, people that have struggled with anxiety that you'd never guess. In the background, we're suffering from this kind of tension. And
you know who you should get? Lenny Mendonca.
Oh, we actually quote, Lenny in the beginning of the book. He's terrific leader and so vulnerable, and what a great example. So actually, that's a great idea. We've struck a friendship. I hadn't even thought of bringing Lenny on the show. That's a great idea.
So just for those of you that don't know Lenny, he's a super like high performer, major noise at McKinsey for many years, and a lot of other things. And he was trying to work with the government of, I believe it was San Francisco, on something very important related to pandemic infrastructure, and just burned out, went into complete overwhelm. But what was interesting, most business leaders, when that happens to them, they sort of slink off into a corner and hope they can get better in private. Yeah. And he just laid it all out. He said, this is what happened to me. I got to the stage where I literally could not get out of bed in the morning without somebody prodding me to do it. And this is what I had to do to get better. And I thought someone like that taking that position is so empowering to others that maybe feel the same, but don't feel that same degree of agency.
Love it. Great idea.
Good. So we're nearly at the top of our hour. How do people learn more? I mean, you've given some great resources. So the Motivators Assessment, We Thrive Together. Any other resources you direct people to?
Well, check us out we have websites at adriangostick.com and chesterelton.com. Please pick up a copy of Leading with Gratitude or the new book, Anxiety at Work. And of course, connect with us on LinkedIn or wherever you like. That's usually where we are, LinkedIn, et cetera. We don't do much on the other social medias.
Yeah.
You're not big Instagram people?
Not yet. We're trying to figure out Clubhouse, but I'm not sure we are.
I dip in there now and again. I'm just like, right.
Anyway, we also have a wonderful gratitude journal that it's a newsletter on LinkedIn. You can sign up. We have almost 70,000 subscribers. We have articles there, tips and hints. So a lot of resources. More than anything, though, our book Anxiety at Work comes out May 4th. May the 4th be with you. It's an easy way to remember it. We'd love you to pre-order that. One for yourself and one for a gift. Anybody can order one. Order two, bar mitzvahs, anniversaries, birthdays. It's always appropriate.
Your post-pandemic antidote, right?
Exactly. Thank
you,
Rita.
Last thing is a couple of quick tips on how to build community and culture when we can't get past the screen. Any thoughts on that to close it?
Yeah, I'll go first. Just, it really is, as I mentioned earlier, it's about rituals. We learned a great little practice. We learned from a manager recently where she has Friday wine and wine parties at 4. You come, you can complain about everything. You have your favorite beverage, alcoholic or not. But by 5 o'clock, you just let it go. And so I love that practice. Create practices that really will, recreate that water cooler talk in this virtual world.
But you have to be intentional about it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like you say, be very intentional and very disciplined and do the one-on-one Zooms and talk about other stuff. How are you doing today? How's the family? How can I help? and set those up as a leader. Who's not speaking up in the meeting? Let's do a little one-on-one. Just check it in. Hey, listen, I know I'm overwhelmed, that vulnerability. I get the sense that you might be a little overwhelmed too. How are things going? How can I help? That kind of discipline, and like Adrian says, rituals, very much, I think, the future of work.
That's inspiring. Well, this hour has just flown. We must get you back when the book comes out, because I think there's a lot more to unpack about what's going on with the book, and to be continued.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having us, Rita.
Thank you so much for making the time. Bye-bye.